Good morning, Daniel.
Morning, Dan.
How was your Thanksgiving?
It was eventful. How was yours?
It was good. Pretty low key. But you say eventful. Is that a story you want to tell?
Yeah, for the purpose of time, we'll put it toward the end. But yeah, I got something I can share with the audience here.
All right. Well, looking forward to it.
All right. So let's talk about some fun things here today. I want to talk about the expense of raising a child, and the difference between even one child or more than one child, and the difference that can make for household finances. I want to talk about spending when there's an overabundance of income or assets, and challenging and getting clients to spend more. And then finally, just wrap up on buying cars, this time of year.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. So we're just going to talk about nothing but expensive things. Right? Children, cars, and just spending more in general. It's a perfect combination.
It's that time of year. So children, right? We have this conversation with folks from time to time. It's, hey, we have a child, maybe we have two, we want to have another, or maybe we don't, but, money's a big deal there. Having one child versus having two, and the expenses that come with that. I think first and foremost, a lot of people just kind of don't know what to expect. They know having a child is expensive and it's going to impact their financial plan, at least financially, negatively, right? Obviously having a child is a wonderful experience, but from a financial perspective, they know it'll be expensive. This is kind of just like a blanket question, but what is the actual cost when we talk to clients of just literally having a child and taking care of them?
The national average for raising a child is approximately $22,000 to $24,000 a year. Now that's averaged out over 18 years, so there's sort of a lumpiness to it. It's actually more expensive in the first 4 or 5 years, particularly if there's a childcare element. And then it sort of tapers off a little bit in sort of the K through 8 period, and then it gets more expensive as you get back into high school with things like jobs, sports, travel, and then also the potential costs of things like insurance and whatnot.
Kind of reminds me of like the retirement spending smile. So for those who aren't privy to it, kind of goes something like this, right? You retire, those first maybe half a decade to a decade, you're doing a lot of things. You're traveling, you're going on vacation, you're spending a lot of money. Then more toward the middle of your retirement, when you're maybe in your 70s, you can't travel as much. Maybe you're just not doing things. You're a little bit more sedentary or just slowing down. But then toward the end of life, right, you might have things like a long-term care expense or some of these more expensive healthcare things going on. So, you kind of see a lot of spending early on, spending to sort of taper down in the middle and then ramp back up toward the end. It sounds like that's kind of what having a kid's like too.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good way of looking at it. I mean, you look at something like childcare, here in Longmont, I think the average is something like $18,000 a year just for, 5 days of daycare. I know of many people who are paying substantially more than that. And there's a fascinating conversation to be had about like the business of childcare and why simultaneously it's so expensive, but also nobody who's in the childcare business seems to be doing well financially. But that's a whole different topic. But yeah, I mean, childcare is super expensive. As they get older, right? Cars, college, all those things become very expensive. In the middle, we're looking at something like $10,000 to $15,000 a year in food, clothing, and still like sports and activities and birthdays and all that stuff.
All right. And out of curiosity, do you find it's linear, right? So like one child is, say, I'll make up a number, $25,000 a year. Is 250, or is two more like 45, or does it kind of even out a little bit if you have more than one, or is it more just this is the rate for every child and it kind of just stays constant?
I'm going to say it's probably a wash because there's a lot of individual household and child dynamics that go into this. Like if you have 2 boys or 2 girls, you might be able to recycle some of the baby clothes, some of the, the toddler clothes, those sorts of things. But at the same time, many families, want their kids to have everything firsthand, nothing secondhand. And so I think it can be something where it is a little cheaper for a second child or more expensive for a second child. It just depends on your philosophy, your approach, and, gender and certain normative assumptions around your family dynamics.
Out of curiosity, do you find or see any difference in the costs for, boys versus girls being more or less for one or the other?
Not in any statistically significant sense. There's certain expenditures, obviously, that girls incur that boys don't, and vice versa, that are either interest related or biologically related at a certain age. I don't think it's materially different. And part of the issue here as well is, there can be a constraining impact on having multiple children, right? If a household can afford one child, that's fine. Can they afford two? If they can afford two, can they afford three? If they can afford three, can they afford four? And so on. So part of your question here, there's the gender dynamics and so on, but there's also just the impact of, for every subsequent child, that may, eat up more and more of a household's financial bandwidth and cause some sort of artificial constraints just because of the number of children. And if, again, gender dynamics, you might get discounting for having multiple children of one gender, or, you may have greater expenses because you have a diverse set of children.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. What about insurance considerations, right? So there's a big difference between you and a spouse living on your own and then having that first child. I want to talk about that. And then also, let's say you have one child and then have a second. Are there additional things that you also need to be considering?
Well, the very first thing we're going to run into here is just going to be maternity costs and then, natal costs as far as having a newborn. I think the most important thing to know here is just the birthday rule for health insurance, which is when you have a child in a household, the child's birth and sort of the immediate health care coverage as far as health insurance goes is going to fall under the coverage that applies to the parent with the birthday earlier in the year. So if one of you is born in January, one of you is born in July, it's going to be the parent born in January whose insurance attaches. Now, the birth of this child becomes a special enrollment period, so you can then go back to your employer or go back to the Affordable Care Act marketplace and reshop or redo your insurance as a household to account for this new child in your household. But just the immediate impact, right, when that child very first is born, that is going to be the kind of immediate impact is just whoever's health insurance is going to be attached to whoever was born earlier in the year. The planning then around things like disability and life insurance. Life insurance is an interesting one because you have essentially the actual amount of life insurance we potentially need, which I'll talk about the nuances there in a second with you. But you also do have death benefits for life insurance for Social Security for children. So if you pass away, Social Security will pay to your children or to your surviving spouse certain survivors' benefits while there are minor children in the household. That helps with the life insurance calculation, but it's generally not sufficient on its own.
Out of curiosity, what's the deal with the birthday thing? Is there a reason for that? I just can't. That was really hanging me up there. I can't stop thinking about that.
I think the reason is they had to come up with some sort of system, and that's the system they went with. I'm sure when the conversation was being had, other proposals were just like, how about we just always have it be the moms or something like that? I think it's just the sort of gender neutral answer they came up with was just birthday orientation.
Fine. So going back to the insurance thing, I think you mentioned, just the importance of was it life insurance you said?
Well, life insurance first and foremost, and again, we touched on Social Security, death benefits for surviving children, surviving spouses. There's an acronym for life insurance, which is LIFE, L-I-F-E. It's going to be liabilities, income, funerary costs, and education. That's a really common sort of rule of thumb way of approaching what the need for life insurance is. So the way we approach that is, okay, liabilities, do we want to pay off the mortgage or pay off any debts we have in the household? However much debt we have, let's get life insurance for that. Income. Do we want to provide income, for as long as the children are with us? Well, in that case, we're probably going to want a 20-year term policy. So then 20 years of income. And then we're going to say funerary, $10,000, $20,000 just to put you in the ground, cremate you, whatever your tradition is. And then education. Do we want to pre-fund college? Now, the good news is, particularly around the income part of this and the education part of this, we don't need to buy the future value cost. So if my income was, let's say, $100,000 a year, I don't need to get $2 million in coverage for a 20-year term policy. And if the education cost is expected to be $300,000 one day in the future, I don't have to get $300,000 for that cost. We can do the discounting math and the compounding rate of return math to estimate a lesser amount of life insurance that, if reinvested, will compound up to the expected values or the needed values for income and for education expenses. As for liabilities and funerary expenses, we're probably going to be cutting those checks pretty quickly after somebody passes away. But each child increases the household's cost cost of living and the potential education costs and even potentially the liability factor. So then for every child that's added to the household, we probably need to revisit the amount of life insurance covering the household and have a serious family discussion about, okay, do I want to take care of you the rest of your life? Do I want to take care of you for the time that the kids are growing up? Do I want to take care of you for 5 or 10 years? And then you got to figure it out. And then, of course, there's income disparities if one spouse makes significantly more or less than the other.
Makes sense to me. So it sounds like just should be revisited after every child and continue having those conversations. Is that the same for like health, disability kind of things as well?
Disability, the bigger thing here is that we just want to have strong disability insurance before we're expecting children in a perfect world, right? Everybody who's working or who relies on their income should have disability insurance anyway. A lot of people forego it because it's interesting. We all know we're going to die, but we have this weird mental mechanic where it's sort of difficult for us to see ourselves as being sick or injured and incapable of providing for ourselves. But in that, disability can be beneficial on both the early child phase, right? Some disability policies will pay out coverage during maternity periods. And in turn, right, disability can just be very important because both childbirth, but also just, the hazards of life, right, can result in you becoming disabled. And again, if your family is dependent, your children are dependent on your income, protecting that is very important.
All right. I think that kind of checks the insurance box there. What about like, I don't know, it seems like we could still give the costs of what childcare is going to look like, the first couple of years and how it ramps up toward those teenager years as well. But it still seems like a lot of families, right, they have a kid and it shocks them. They're like, wow, this is just more expensive than maybe I thought it was. What are maybe some of the just like mistakes that you would, advise families on when it comes to expanding the household?
I think one big thing is that every child has a compounding opportunity cost. And this is not to try to talk anybody out of having children by any means, but it's just recognizing that it simultaneously deprives you of resources for other things and creates additional obligations. So it's a twofer, because now all the money that you otherwise could have spent on your quality of life or saved and invested is now going towards childcare, raising this child, feeding this child, giving this child a great life, right? Or these children a great life. And every child is creating not necessarily a mandatory pressure, but I think a societal pressure to save for college, prepare to support them as they get into adulthood, etc. And so simultaneously, we are now spending a lot more money on something else. And also we have more obligations than we previously had. So there's just this compounding impact where having children not only costs us money now, but also, reallocates future resources as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I think it's interesting you mentioned like the societal pressure to provide for like a higher education or buy them a car or something like that. That's a tricky one, right? Because, I think we all probably want the best for the kids, but we have some clients that don't do any of that. They say, hey, look, no, nothing was provided for me. I kind of want to do that for my child. And then we have others that kind of are the opposite. And that's a conversation we can have when we get into the getting clients to spend more thing. But it is interesting how there's definitely a trend with current clients I see where more and more of them come in wanting to say, hey, look, I want to provide for their education, or I want to be able to do this or that for them, which I don't think was always the case, but you just really do see it more and more. It's becoming more and more of a priority with clients and potential clients than maybe it probably was when you started your career or 20 or 30 years ago when an advisor was planning for somebody's retirement or doing their financial plan.
I'll highlight that actually could be a sample bias problem for us in our client population. We haven't really tried to do this necessarily, but we have generally over the last 2 or 3 years started to attract a more and more affluent client in the Longmont community. And I think just as your wealth increases, your desire or willingness to provide more support for your children probably also increases. But we have plenty of clients who just say, like, look, I paid for mine, they'll pay for theirs, and that's fine. My only pushback on that, and it's not a planning pushback, it's just a how things work pushback, is our college funding, college student loan system presupposes a certain amount of familial support. And so if you are a well-off family and you're just like, nah, my kids are on their own, your kids will end up with an enormous amount of student debt, because you're not helping them out. But they also won't benefit from some of the subsidized programs or grant programs that are needs-based that you otherwise might assume they'd be provided with if you just didn't help, because the system doesn't recognize that you're not helping. It just assumes that you will.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, I think that kind of gives me a good overview there. I'm not having a child right now, but it's still a good overview. Is there anything? Right, right, right. So is there anything else you think the audience should know there before we move on?
I think a couple of just quick notes here. A lot of people think about their child-related costs in isolation. So you mentioned like buying the car. That's not just the car; it's a car plus. Do we now need to get another car in the household? Plus, how much is the insurance going to go up by? So something as simple as we'll buy them an old beater suddenly still cost us an extra couple $1,000s a year in insurance costs and potential liability. We have a one household where one of their adult children now has already been in 2 car accidents and gotten a DUI before the age of 21. That family's insurance costs are insane. I mean, we're talking almost $10,000 a year just for home and auto. So just keeping in mind that these costs are not just happening in a bubble. And the other thing is that every child creates a compounding thing, right? Every dinner now costs 50% more, then 100% more, then 150% more. Every plane flight, right, costs that much more, right? Steph on our team, like she and her family drove to Alabama for Thanksgiving last week. Because I'm sure, right? Yes, because you experienced this, right? For flights home, right? Flights are probably several hundred, if not close to $1,000 a person. And for a family of 4, it's like, look, we can spend $400 or $500 driving for Thanksgiving, or we can spend $4,000. It's kind of a no-brainer from a financial standpoint. So it's just being mindful that there are a lot of compounding effects in adding people to your household. Whereas when you got married or when you found a partner, you probably found a lot of savings and discounts by sharing finances. Adding children sort of has the inverse thing because, darn it, we love them. They're cute, but they do cost a lot of money.
Yeah, I get that. I don't have kids, but I do have a girlfriend, and even every time we go out, like I'm here in Longmont, if I go out by myself, $20-$30 if I get something to eat and probably something to drink. Tell you what, though, we go out, the 2 of us, that doubles the cost instantly. So it's I've noticed that, at least with just the 2 of us, and if we have a kid or 2, 4x that. So
Yeah, and such is life, but it's all worth it.
all right, well, let's get clients to spend more, Dan. I kind of thought about this one in one of our recent episodes where you actually mentioned, right, we're talking about moving the goalposts and you more income. A lot of people immediately just want more. They want to do more with the resources they have and sometimes push that boundary too far. However, we see a lot of the opposite too, where, I think for the last decade or 2, there's been a very clear message in financial planning. It's live below your means, save, invest, right? And I like to think, at least in the biased subsection of the population we work with, that message has worked. Like, we have a lot of clients who have done a really good job saving, living below their means, investing the difference, and growing that over years and years and letting it compound. The message worked, at least with our group we speak with. But the message has almost worked too well, where we have a good amount of clients who, we run the numbers, we show them what they can spend reasonably, and they can't do it. They've built these habits and routines and lifestyle around spending a certain amount for decades. And now that we're giving them the permission and helping them realize they can double that or spend considerably more than they are, not all of them are genuinely able to do it, right? We have clients that are worth north of a couple $1 million and still say, I'm looking for the cheapest flight on the plane and I'm sitting in the middle seat, in the back of the plane because I got a good deal on it, when they can fly first class and enjoy, the fruits of their labor. And it's interesting, right? Because like I said, the message worked, but now we're struggling with the opposite part of that, which is getting them to actually spend more. So it's easy, or maybe not easy. It's simple to show clients the numbers. Say, hey, look, you spend this much, you can now spend 20% more, 30% more. And they look at that and they say, no, that's great. Nice. Well, maybe we'll go on another vacation here or there. But they don't all do it. Maybe besides showing them the numbers, how do we actually go about convincing people and helping them spend more of what they can't take with them when they do pass?
I think there's a couple sort of easy tricks to this. And I say easy, it's all relative. For some people, they're already like, oh, I'm going to do everything you say already. So not a problem. And some people, it would be a miracle if they did one of the things we're about to talk about. So, a couple things that are kind of common. I think one is just rounding up, right? If you normally fly economy plus. If you normally fly economy plus, fly first. If you normally fly first, fly business, whatever. Just going ahead and just saying, like, look, you can't take it with you. I think a great and popular book in finance is Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. Really just making the point of, like, look, you only have this one great life as far as we know. So make the best of it and try to enjoy it. So I think rounding up is a good one. I think buying time is great, right? Somebody to clean your house, somebody to mow your lawn, somebody to shovel your walk. And I know a lot of people like get satisfaction from those activities. But just in the sense that like, if you're trying to find ways to spend some money, great. Do you love mowing your lawn more than you love spending time with your kids? Do you love shoveling the walk more than you like sleeping in? Like whatever it is, just going ahead and finding those things. I think another one is just creating a pseudo business, right? Engaging in philanthropy or kind of becoming a patron of a nonprofit or an organization where you just give up your time freely and become sort of a champion for it, where you're matching donations or helping do fundraising or that sort of thing. I think those are some common things that we look at as easy ways to kind of ramp up spending a little bit. In worst case scenario, we can always just give it away, but I'd like to see people enjoy it for themselves first if it's possible.
Do you find like, you one of those things, for example, right? So I'm looking out the window right now, it's snowing. You can get somebody to plow your driveway, shovel your sidewalk for you. Do you find like once you're able to get a client to do that and they say, hey, good news, Dan, I hired somebody and now they do this for me. Do you find that at that point it almost creates like a snowball effect where they're now comfortable and they're like, hey, look, like I did it, nothing blew up, I'm still all right, like maybe I could spend even more? Like, do you find that it creates a little bit of momentum sometimes where we can now use that to spend even further and more?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's very similar even just to the transition to retirement. Like a lot of people are really anxious going into retirement. They're really kind of cautious, conservative, like, gosh, what if? And then you talk to them a year into retirement, and they're like, retirement's great. Everybody should retire. You should retire. It's sort of the same thing. It's like, you don't mind cleaning your house. You don't mind mowing your own lawn, but all those various things. And then, boy, you sure don't miss it, it turns out. I think it often helps. So it'd be nice if people just did it all, right, or did what was reasonable for them out of the gate. But I think once people get their time back and start spending their time more on the things they enjoy, they really don't look back.
What about like patterns? Let's talk about underspenders first, people who could spend considerably more and just aren't. And then we could talk about like overspenders. But underspenders, right? Like, what do we notice in clients who are underspending? Like, what are things they're saying in a conversation with you, or things you're noticing where you're essentially, besides the numbers, like identifying, oh, they're going to have a problem spending more?
The number one thing that I see that identifies an underspender to me amongst the non-retired population is they're very cash rich. And I specifically mean cash. They have a ton of money in their checking and savings. They may not have a lot in their 401k or their brokerage or elsewhere, and maybe they do, right? But they have, right? Let's say they make as a household $200,000 a year and they've got $200,000 in checking and savings. Right? We talk about emergency funds, right? 3 to 6 months, single versus married, and all these various dynamics. There's just a point to which you have too much cash. And what that tells me is, particularly if it's sitting in your checking, you just don't spend all your money. And that's great, right? We're financial planners. If you don't spend the money, good news, your plan looks better. But it's a pretty common thing for us to run into a new client and for that new client to have $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 sitting in checking, savings, maybe a CD here or two, and their emergency fund need is only $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. So that's a common thing that we notice there. Otherwise, then it's sort of this, there's not a lot new going on. And I don't mean that like in a flashy way, right? When we ask like, oh, what are your plans for this year? Don't really have any plans, right? What have you done that you enjoyed recently? Not much. Right, there's sort of a low activity commentary. And that doesn't mean that they needed to buy a new car or travel or anything crazy or flashy, but they're sort of comfortable creatures of habit. And I'm kind of one of these people, right? Like I love a random week in the middle of June. I love that week. Like there's no holiday, nothing's going on. It's a great time. I love a Monday through Sunday that looks exactly the same as the last Monday or Sunday, so I get that. But that's sort of what I see in people who are overaccumulating and underspending relative to their means and their opportunities.
All right. It's interesting though. Like, what about, we speak with a lot of people that just come in and they kind of say what you said in different words. It's, I'm simple. I don't do extravagant things, and maybe it's a fear-based in that they don't want to spend more. But what if it is literally just like, no, like I'm good. I do what I got to do, and that's life, and I don't need more, even though I could spend it. I'm happy where I am.
I would say the attitude becomes the thing that matters to me more than. So you brought up the client who would rather fly economy in the back seat. I'm thinking about our good friend Dennis. Dennis is great, and we talked to him about flying first class recently, and his response is like, "But Dan, I got such a good deal." Like, he was so pleased about it. I can't hold that against Dennis. Like, I would like to see Dennis, sleep on a flight over to Italy or something. But otherwise, I think about it in terms of like, okay, you clearly enjoyed it. You didn't mind it. It fits you. That's fine. I think it's when I see more of a boredom or an apathy or a dissatisfaction and a listlessness and I don't know what to do with this problem sort of attitude. That's where I think that frugality is more of a problem than a personality trait.
Yeah, I think that's good. What about overspenders? We also see people, and I think this one might be easier to identify, right? Like, you can spend this much, you spent 2x that much. But, let's talk about overspenders. Like, what are some of the trends or maybe even like things you see mentally going on there that kind of raise the alarm bells for you as a planner?
So I think the easiest way to identify this is that when we build a financial plan, right, we get a budget, we get a cash flow, we get all these assumptions built into it, and we can see year by year by year, assuming certain things about inflation and so on, how much money they're going to need to take out of their accounts, from which accounts, and so on. Like, we can calculate that, we can see that, we can do all the tax efficient stuff, etc. And then there's sort of a personality challenge here, which is we can tell the client, hey, according to our calculus, you're going to need $106,000 a year. We're going to take it from this account, and this account, and this account. Here's how it's going to happen, when it's going to show up, etc. Or we can discount it down and say, hey, you're going to need $106,000 a year. So I think what we'll do is we'll send you 80 throughout the year because it looks like, 26,000 of this might be more ad hoc, one-off special stuff. You let us know when you need that. And the trick is some people end up in the first group. They say, nope, go ahead and give me the whole 106. I'll manage my money, do just fine. And then they're coming back to us, throughout the year, 2, 3, 4 times. And there's just these little one-off things. They're never crazy, right? But it'll be like, oh, my refrigerator went bad. I need $2,000 for a refrigerator. Oh, my property tax, bill is due. I'm going to need $4,000 for that. Oh, I want to get a new trailer, or, I want to fix something, whatever it is. And so they're just asking for $2,000, $4,000, $5,000, maybe 10 at most. Not a huge amount, not going to break the bank, but they're doing it regularly. They're doing it enough that it adds up to $10,000, $20,000 a year. And that's sort of a challenge because the $106,000 number was supposed to encompass these random one-off, every once in a while events. But instead, they're taking that $106,000 number, they're spending all of it every month, right? $106,000 divided by 12. They're spending all of that. And then they're coming back and asking for more. And the trick is, the market's been overall generally considered really good for the last decade. So a lot of people have gotten away with this where they've distributed an extra 10, 20, 30 a year, and it's not really hurt them in any serious sense. I don't know that that's a long-term sustainable behavior. I don't know how long the anomaly of 10% plus years goes on for, or whether that's the new norm. Nobody knows. But that's something where I'm a little concerned about it because that behavior only works in a kind of an excess growth environment. But if we go through a 3, 4, 5-year trend of only 4%, 5% returns or flat returns, that's going to become a serious problem for a lot of folks.
Well, it's interesting. You almost made it seem like it's more of a random things that just come up as opposed to overspending because they're going on more vacations, doing more fun things. Is that typically what you see? It's more just, hey, yeah, my water pipe broke, need to fix it, or have this new home renovation I'm doing, which I guess is a funner thing. But like, do you tend to find it's more practical things as opposed to maybe like luxuries?
I'm gonna say that that's actually a bit of a trick the clients play, and it's not malicious, right? We are entrusted with their money. It's their money. If they want to say "F you, Dan, give me my money," like, sure, it's yours, of course. But what I will see is a client might do something like take their $4,000 of income and spend it on a trip, and then come to me and say, "Oh, Dan, I don't have any money for this thing I need to fix." Right, so they're not coming to me and asking me for permission to spend money on the vacation. They're spending money on the vacation where it's sort of guilt-free to them, and then they're coming to me to respectfully ask for a reasonable amount of money for this necessity. So I think it's sort of a trick clients play. It doesn't matter to me, by the way. If I will just tell you as a planner, right? You're fine to take the extra money, or I'd be careful taking the extra money. It doesn't matter what it's for. I don't care what it's for. But some clients, I do think, try to sort of dress up those extra cash requests as being practical, valuable, important things, and will hide maybe the semi-less responsible things in their everyday spending cash flows.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I don't know, a lot of clients think we're like the spending police, where we get it all the time. It's, hey, I need an extra, $5,000. Like, don't kill me. I'm doing this or that. And it's like, no, have fun. You could totally afford it and have a blast. So it's funny when they kind of try to like shield it and they make up something and it's like, all right, yeah, take the money. It's all right, but it is interesting too. I think they do some of that disguising of expenses, as you say, which is funny. But I'd say let's end it on a positive note. Like, can you give me an experience, or do you have any experience of some clients who did go the route of scarcity in retirement, and clearly the numbers check out, like they can spend considerably more, and eventually maybe embraced spending more, and maybe what are some of the things they maybe spent more on?
So I'll think of a particular client couple who are now really getting retired. One of them retired a couple of years ago. The other one retired this year. And when they had sort of this 1 or 2 year transition period, they were really anxious about it. I mean, like crying when I told them they could retire, like just scared to death, anxious that it was not going to work for them. Spoilers, they could have retired years ago. Like they were so fine. It's not even funny how fine they were. But that was their anxiety. That was their concern is, well, gosh, I just, what if? And then one of them finally made the leap, and, they went into it thinking like, I'm going to be super conservative, super careful. And then life happened the first year, right? Like multiple car accidents in the family. They have adult children. So we're buying new cars for one of them, for one of the kids. We're having to take these extra trips where like all this extra stuff showed up, where the first year retirement, they distributed 100% more income than they anticipated for the year. We're talking going from like 180 to 360 for the year. And of course, then they had the inverse problem. Like we had to do all this. It was all this genuine necessity stuff, but also now we're like really scared of being judged. We're really scared that Dan is going to get like mad at us and chastise us or something like that. And when we finally had the conversation where they showed up and said like, well, here's all our distributions of the year. And I was like, whoa, this is so much more than we thought it was going to be. They still increased their net worth that year by like $400,000 net of the extra distributions, because back to the point where I said they were so fine, it's not even funny. They were fine to do this. Like their needs were only so much. They overspent their needs dramatically, but that dramatic overspending was still perfectly reasonable within the scope of their overall wealth and assets. And that's sort of the thing. I returned to like a Carl Richards, making decisions on a changing landscape thing. Retirement planning, making the transition to spending more versus being frugal, is a decision under uncertainty. Maybe this year turns out to be a bad year to increase your spending because it's a bad year for the markets or something. The trick is financial plans are a living, breathing thing, not a fixed course of action. So that's, I think, the most important thing, right? A lot of people go into retirement a little over-aggressive and then need to taper down. Plenty of people go into retirement scared to death that they're going to not have enough money and not going to make it, even though the numbers say they almost couldn't fail if they could try. And it's just a matter of adjusting to your circumstances and, again, focusing on what the meaning of money is in your life, which is to help you live a good quality of life.
Yeah, it's easier said than done to walk the tightrope between spending a lot, spending a little, and we just try to keep walking forward and teeter the best we can, I guess. So transitioning here, I'm in the market for a new car. New as in new to me, maybe not new as an actual vehicle. We'll find out by the end of this conversation. So I do have some questions here, in no particular order. I'm just going to start asking them. But it's that time of year, right? We're seeing the 0% down and the lifetime deal on cars, and at the end of the year there's just a slew of commercials for anybody that lives and watches maybe any ounce of television this time of year. So first and foremost, I think some good questions here for me, but also just for the audience. I want to talk about buying outright versus taking on a loan. Here's my interpretation on it, and feel free to push back, right? Interest rates now, not super favorable. So if I had this conversation with you a decade earlier, I might be more inclined to take out the loan, invest the difference because I could get it at a pretty low interest rate. But right now, I can come up with the cash to pay for a car, and I'm inclined to do that as opposed to take a loan out because it's not a necessity and interest rates aren't really favorable right now. And I get that can change if you don't have the cash to fully fund a vehicle. Am I kind of thinking through that correctly here?
I think the break-even calculus lines up to how you're describing it, right? It's one thing to say, rates are 2% and I can get 8%, and even after taxes, I'm still doing 6%, so that 4% delta is good. And even though it's not a guarantee, the probability is favorable enough that I'm comfortable with that margin. It's different when the interest rate is 6% or 7%, and your expected return is 8% before taxes, and now maybe after taxes, you're still going to be below it. So I think paying cash makes a lot of sense in an environment like this, but, right, cash flow dependent, facts and circumstances dependent, cost and quality of vehicle dependent. I think there's a lot of factors that go into it, but ceteris paribus, all things being equal, today I'm more inclined to pay cash for a vehicle than borrow, unless you do get one of those occasional rare, no zero cash down, 0% interest rate offers. And you just have to remember that all the interest they thought they would make on financing it for you anyway, it's just baked into the price. So you'd really have to look at that price at face value anyway and just say, okay, if this was going to be a $35,000 car and the interest was going to make it a $40,000 car, am I comfortable paying $40,000 for a car? That is really the question we got to ask there.
Interesting. And what about, like, say I get a car and I do take a loan out for 5 years for this vehicle? Like, how does that impact the timeline for when I will actually, like, net out better for selling the car? Like, I'd assume in my head, it's not beneficial to sell the car in the first 5 years while I still have this liability on it. Is that kind of correct here?
Generally correct. I mean, the bigger thing here is that auto loans tend to extend the sort of I'll say, like, effective life of the vehicle. Plenty of cars last more than 5-6 years, but just recognizing that, the depreciation on the vehicle is so rapid over the first 3 to 5 years that's kind of why loan terms tend to be pretty short, is because they know that the vehicle's value is dropping like a rock every day you drive it out of the driveway. So in that particular context, it helps if you're paying off the loan a little bit faster if you then do want to sell it or turn it over. But what I'll say there is, if you intend to keep a vehicle for less than 3 to 5 years, leasing actually may be the better option for you, because it will cost you less in payments. And, the turnover on a used vehicle after 4 or 5 years is not going to be great in the first place. Like, you will get some of your money back in that scenario, but how much money you get back from selling your car to then go buy a different car might be equal or greater or lesser than the commensurate difference in just the leasing price over that same 3 to 5 year period anyway.
That's an interesting one. It's the first thing you said there. It was the difference between buying new versus buying used, right? You said the second you drive it off the lot, it's not new anymore, right? Like, that car is now a used vehicle, and it's going to depreciate year over year at a substantial rate. Like, how do you think through, like, buying a new car that doesn't have anybody else's issues, I guess, right? Versus, like, a 3 or 4 year old car that I'm reaping the benefits of the depreciation. It's $5,000-$10,000 cheaper now, but, like, I'm also running the risk of someone else's problems, right? Whether it's certified pre-owned or I'm just getting it off Craigslist or something. Like, how do you kind of think through that? Is that a risk that you really only factor in when the depreciation's great enough? Like, I guess, how do you think through the used versus new and someone else's issues? I want to just some advice there.
Thank you for teeing up a great Nobel Prize winning academic theory, the economics of information, also known as the market for lemons. So real succinctly, the value of a new car is in not the fact that it is intrinsically better than a used car, it's in the avoidance of those issues, right? Like, the reason a new car is considered so much more expensive and why used cars depreciate so rapidly is the potential for problems. I think the answer to your question lies in how rapid that difference is. So, for example, do I think you're in deep trouble spending, let's say, $35,000 instead of $40,000 on a base model truck? No, I think you're probably fine to go with a used vehicle there, in terms of, the truck could have problems, but it's going to maintain value. Whereas, should you buy, like, a used BMW luxury vehicle after 4 or 5 years? Probably not. A, because they're known for being kind of finicky and high maintenance, but also because the value has dropped enormously. And that drop in value, that enormous drop in value is essentially commensurate as a signal of the potential costs of the issues the vehicle could have or that could arise because of its use. So if you go from, like, a $70,000 luxury sedan or coupe down to it being like a $30,000 luxury vehicle in just 3 or 4 years, that's a pretty substantial market signal about the potential cost of the issues you may incur later on. I think the way to look at buying new versus used is, do I want to spend money on the investment of not having to deal with the hassles in the next 3 to 5 years, or do I want to pay less now, acknowledging that I will have higher costs on a going basis sooner than later? It doesn't mean it's going to cost you more over the life of the purchase, right? Like, if I buy a $30,000 car versus a $70,000 new version of that car, and I have to spend $10,000 in the next 2 years, I'm still netting 40 versus 70. Like, it's still fine. But depending on the value of your time or the hassle factor, that may still be more expensive or just cost you more in time value than you want it to. So I think that's really where you want to look at it. I think for vehicles that retain a lot of their value, buying used is fine. I think at the same time, if the discount for new versus used, let's say you're talking about like Camrys, where it starts at 20 and maybe after 3 or 5 years, it's only like 15. I don't know that that discount is deep enough for it to be worth the potential hassle factor.
Why?
Well, I mean, again, look at the thing here. So let's assume it's a 3-year difference. So 3 years, call it 36,000 miles, and it's going to be 20,000 new or $15,000 used. Okay, you are saying that the cost or the value or the potential opportunity costs of anything that goes wrong with that vehicle in the next 3 years that might have otherwise been avoided for the next 6 years in the purchase of a new version is worth or costs you less than the $5,000 delta. And that can be true for a lot of people, right? Particularly the lower your income, the less all this stuff costs. That's the opportunity cost component of this. But if you are a high-power lawyer, business owner, neurosurgeon, whatever it is, where your time is incredibly valuable, that could actually be more expensive on the very first trip to the shop. It just depends.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. So you said cars that retain their value. Are there specific types of vehicles that retain their value more than others?
Trucks famously retain their value, I think, because they are so usable both in personal use but also in business use. So there's a million and one landscaping trades companies, etc., that just drive a fleet of old F-150s and Dodge Rams and so on. So I think there's a world here where you just look at it and say, okay, we're going to accept that these are essentially vehicles that are expected to last for 15, 20, 30 years without much of a problem. In turn, you don't see a lot of value retained in coupes and sedans. You don't see a lot of value retained in luxury vehicles except for collector's models, which, the trick to collector's models is they're not usually new cars, they're old cars. So you got to pay attention to those differences quite a bit. But essentially, if there's a business use for the vehicle, you'll see it retain a little bit more value. If it's just a purely commuter family type of vehicle, it doesn't tend to retain value very well.
All right. Well, how do I factor in my insurance costs, right? So let's say I go with a new vehicle, brand new off the lot. How does that impact my new insurance premiums versus I get a cheaper used vehicle and the insurance premiums for that car? Is that even worth considering here?
The liability component of your vehicle is going to be essentially priced the same, but the comprehensive and collision might be priced very differently. So if I buy an old metal box on wheels, I'm going to expect lower costs for comp and collision coverage. If I buy a brand new car, the insurance company is exposed that much more to the potential loss of that more valuable vehicle, so then it's going to cost more. You also see a couple insurance carriers advertise full replacement policies. Those are going to be super expensive just because they are offering to buy you a brand new car of the same make model instead of buying you the actual cash value of the vehicle 3-5 years later after you've purchased it.
That's interesting because in my head, I would have thought newer car would probably be cheaper from insurance, but the way you're making it sound is it's a safer, newer, which also means if something happens to it, more expensive for the insurance company to repair.
Yeah, I mean, you have to remember the different pools of risk management here, right? The liability component's the same, right? Could you hurt other people? I can hurt people in an old shitbox car or in a Ferrari. It doesn't really matter what I'm driving. I can hurt anybody or break anything. When it comes to medical claims, newer vehicles are going to be, safer generally. But medical coverage is pretty nominal under policies as far as the med pay portion of it, not the liability portion of it. But again, the liability is going to be triggered more by the quality of their vehicle and how much damage I do to them or how badly hurt they are by me. And then the comp and collision, which is the part that fixes or repairs my vehicle, is going to be the part that's much more expensive. And that's just going to reflect the market value of the vehicle. The newer it is, the more expensive it is, the nicer it is, the more it's going to cost them to replace or repair. And so that's just going to increase my premiums.
All right. So I'd say my last thought here is actually I have one more. Just a quick question. What about registration? Is it more expensive to register my vehicle in, say, Colorado if it's a newer luxury SUV versus an old beater?
Yeah, Colorado, at least specifically, prices based on the age and quality of the vehicle. So my 2015 Prius costs $90 to register every year. If I bought a 2025 or 2026 Prius, it would probably cost me several $100s to register. Different states handle this in different ways, though, so your mileage may vary.
So some states it might just be a flat rate.
I would love flat rates, but that's also a regressive tax system, Daniel. So we got to be careful about that.
Sure. All right. Well, you know, well, I don't like to press. I'm not a big presser, but this is one of those things like you can nickel and dime over like a sale at the bagel store or something and make $1 here or there. But like this is one of those things that like if you actually put the effort in, you can save $2,000 to $3,000, which is, let's say I didn't do that and I just said, yeah, whatever the sticker price is or whatever you're going to give it to me for, I like it. It's within my budget. Like that can essentially wash out every other nickel and diming opportunity you had throughout the year on your bagels. But like, how aggressive should I be when I'm talking to like dealers and kind of doing that? Because I'd rather not. I'd rather just be nice and kind of make sure everybody wins. But at the same time, like I don't want to get scammed here. So like, how do I kind of pin these folks against each other to make sure I'm getting the best deal, but not screwing anybody over here?
Yeah, this is one of those things where like you read a lot of blogs or a lot of books or see a lot of videos where it's like, you go talk to 9 dealers and make them like bid against each other and do all that. How many times have you bought a car? And not you, Daniel, but like just anybody who's listening to this, like how many times have you bought a car? And how many times have you successfully like managed to get 8 different dealerships to bid against each other? Right? How many times have you talked to a professional salesperson or just haggled him down to like a quarter of his original price? So I think the notion that like amateurs are going to somehow set up like this convoluted fancy way of getting the best possible deal on a vehicle is just absolute fantasy. I think the easiest way to go about this is to hire an auto broker. Two basic things here. Number one, they work for you. Number two, you don't pay them. Right? They get paid by the dealership that ultimately sells the vehicle. And these are people whose full-time job is getting you a vehicle of your make model preference that you're looking for, new or used. And that's what they do full time, right? They're going to do way better at this than you are. I think that's the easiest answer if you want to engage in this sort of, haggling price negotiation shenanigans. If not, don't play stupid games. I mean, just know your budget is, know what you want, shop around until you get it, or shop around until you get as close to it as you think you're going to get to it. And then, the biggest thing is just don't get sucked into the sales funnel, right? The people selling cars at the dealerships sell several cars a week. They've been doing it for months, years, decades maybe. Like they are way better at this than you are. So don't pretend that somehow you're going to come in with like a clever list of ideas and rake them over the coals. The trick there, again, is just know what you want to pay, know what you're willing to pay for, and be willing to say no, pause, or walk away. Don't kind of get sucked into the do it now thing, because that's what a good sales process does.
And then I assume, like, am I wrong for thinking this is actually a good time of year to get a vehicle? Like in my head, I'm like, all right, it's the end of the year. These car salesmen probably do have like quotas they're trying to hit. Like, am I getting in it? Is this when I should be doing it? And when maybe I do have a little bit more quote unquote leverage?
I think there's 2 things here, particularly on new vehicles. You do still see some of that, 0% down, 0% financing stuff. Remember what I said earlier, the cost of the financing is just baked into the price. So you want to be sure that you're comfortable with the price in the same way that you would want to be comfortable with, financing something and what the price would be after all the interest payments. So you have to factor that in either way. And then to your question, maybe the biggest issue is going to be, the trying to leverage their quota against them only works A, towards the end of the cycle, and B, if they haven't hit their quota already. So if they've already hit their quota, you have 0 leverage. And then waiting towards the end of the cycle means sometimes all the good deals are gone or all the vehicles you wanted to buy are gone. So you got to kind of weigh your incentives here. Are we really going to hold out for the best possible deal, potentially missing out on what we wanted to buy in the first place? Or are we willing to just go ahead and take what's out there and do it at this time? I don't generally find that buying a vehicle because somebody's out promoting something is a good reason to buy a vehicle, just because you have to remember that they're doing it for a reason. And that reason is to get you to buy, not because they're just trying to do charity for you.
All right. I think I'm just going to walk and ride my bike more.
It's going to be a long trip back to New Jersey next year.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well that helps. Is there anything else, the audience or I should know before I dive into the deep end here?
Yeah, talk to your financial planner before you go buy a car, because I don't know what it is. It's half the time clients just tell us they bought cars. And I'm like, you couldn't have asked. You couldn't at least send an email. Come on. Like, we're here for you. We're here to help you with this.
All right. That helps. I think that's wise advice. Yeah, I think we do get a lot of those emails like, hey, yeah, I just got this new car. It's like, oh, okay, that's news to me.
Yeah, well, and the good news is I've never had somebody do that where I was like, what are you doing now? But it is one of those things where you're just like, why do you pay us if you're not going to have us do the finance stuff for you? And it's just one. It's a nitpick, but it's a surprisingly common one. But that said, let's hand it off to you, Daniel. What have you learned in the past week you think our audience would benefit from?
I don't know. This is an interesting one. I don't know who it'll apply to specifically, but since we're going to talk about something else after this here, it'll almost be like two learnings. So as of anybody listening to this, I turned 25 recently, and it's interesting, I'd still consider myself objectively young, but I started in financial services when I was 19 years old. So like if I was young now, I was extremely young then. And, at the time, pretty much every single conversation I was in, like, had the question of how old are you, which is, it's understandable, and the age is kind of the quickest, like, shorthand thing people are going to reach for. I learned a lot along the way. You can't buy confidence. You kind of have to earn it through, cutting your teeth and everything and whatnot. But maybe it's the hairline receding, or maybe it's just no longer being the quote unquote kid in the room. But at some point, like, that expectation kind of shifts, which I think's been an interesting observation. I've kind of just like reflected on, like, at a certain point, like, colleagues and clients, like, honestly, just like, I still get it, but they stop kind of viewing you as like the promising and like is like the promising person, who's got a lot of like things that will happen for them, and they kind of just start viewing you as like accountable. So it's interesting, like, I think just over time, like, I started to get less and less of that. It's less like, oh, this kid will do good things, like, in the future. And at a certain point, they just kind of expect, like, you either are or you aren't. Like, you're no longer the young kid on the block. You're just, like, someone on the block. So you either are doing something with that or you're not. And it wasn't as gradual as I thought it would be. Like, it kind of just, like, stopped one day. And it's interesting. I still do get it occasionally, like, the age question. But, like, now on, like, if like, your 20s are a mountain, like, the first 4 years you're climbing up the mountain, 20 to 24, 25, I'm now, like, on the top of the mountain. And then, like, 26 to 29, I'll be, like, on the descending end of my 20s. But, like, now that I'm on the top, I guess, in this scenario, like, I just get it. I've been getting it less and less, which I think is interesting. So that's more of, like, a reflection. But I do know whether it's through hiring or people listening to have kids, like, I know that the age thing can be difficult for a lot of people when they are objectively maybe earlier in their career. And I do think it's nice to know at a certain point it kind of shifts or stops depending on, like, the amount of effort you're willing to put in to make it stop through education, experience, credentials, and just, like, doing things.
Fairly said. And as somebody who looked like he was 60 when he was 25, I agree. It comes at you fast.
Yep, that's all I got for this week, though.
Well, good stuff. The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast. All right, Daniel, you've teased us enough. So tell us, why are we in the market for a new car?
Yeah. So I'm in the market for a new car. So over Thanksgiving, you kind of alluded to the fact that airplane prices were so high since these flights were so expensive. I think part of it was kind of like when I was looking around the time the government was still shut down. So, basic economics, like there's a restriction in the supply, but the demand's still kind of the same. So these prices are just going to skyrocket. So it was going to cost me like $1,300 round trip to get from Denver to Newark in Jersey, and then back from Newark to Denver. So I was just gonna drive. So my brother just moved out to Chicago, and I hadn't visited him in a little bit, and I haven't seen his place in Chicago. So I was like, all right, cool. I'm gonna drive to Chicago, and then I'm gonna drive from Chicago to New Jersey, which might sound crazy, but I like driving, and I have endurance at the car. Like 15 hours was nothing. I genuinely, if it was daytime when I got to Chicago, probably could have done the last 12 legs, like with maybe just a quick trip to a diner for an hour and probably banged it out. But yeah, so it's 1,008 miles to Chicago from Longmont, Colorado, where I live. And I had 11 miles in the 15-hour drive left, so I was in the home stretch, right? 7 o'clock at night, started my drive at 2:30 in the morning. I stopped 3 times for gas and to use the bathroom, and that was it. And I was excited to get there. So I'm on the highway, and we're going like 20 miles an hour. The pace of traffic is starting to settle a little bit. It's Chicago, so there's traffic naturally. I'd also like to think I'm a good driver. I know everybody says that, and statistically, everybody cannot be a good driver. All my friends say I drive like a grandpa because I go like below the speed limit. I'm pretty slow. So I'm doing my thing, and there's some gentleman in the shoulder of the highway, which for anybody that cannot drive, you're not supposed to be driving on the shoulder of the highway. And he's going 70 miles an hour. So he essentially realizes he shouldn't be doing that, and that the shoulder kind of collapses and he needs to make a split decision. And his split decision was to ram into the back of my car going about 55 miles an hour. So I'm fine. Thankfully, somehow I got out without really any major, I wouldn't say any major injuries, some minor injury maybe, but like I'm good, which is as much as you could really ask for this. But the car's done. So I'm in the market for a new car. But I think, it's interesting, right? Like we think, and we hear it all the time from people, whether it's car insurance or it's health insurance or something, like, oh, I'm good, I'm healthy. Or it's good, like I'm a safe driver. Or it's okay, like I take care of myself and I'm not going to die. But like, even if all those things are true, right? Like this guy could just come out of nowhere and ruin your day. And it's totally out of your control. And it's like, all right, well, for some of these things in life, like these moments of impact, like people kind of don't think it's going to happen to them, and it's not fully within your control. And I think that's just important to kind of realize, like even as a financial planner, like who understands like insurance and all of this stuff, like you want to get it in place, well in advance of ever realizing something might happen to you. Because like the moment of impact when you are facing the opposite direction on the highway and there are cars flying by you at 70 miles an hour, like that's not when you want to discover you have missing coverage. You want to have those details that may seem insignificant at the time on paper well before, there's things you have to deal with, which makes the aftermath like a lot more manageable. Like even something as small as like I knew I had rental coverage, so like I was able to get a rental car, so I have a car. That would be pretty inconvenient considering it's snowing right now in Colorado, and it would be difficult to get to work without a car. So I'm turning it into an insurance conversation naturally, but like they're not insignificant things. Make sure you have them in place, because when you're on the highway and your lights are blaring in your car and you're looking the opposite direction, that's not when you want to figure out you're screwed. So that's all I got. I figured I'd share it because I am in the market for a new car.
Well, as the old expression goes, right, better to have and not need than need and not have. But if anybody has a car that they want to give to Daniel here for 0% down, 0% financing, 'tis the season.
Yeah, and I'm not a big haggler, so I'll be nice.